During the Battle of Britain, the British lost about 1,600 planes in their fight for freedom against the Nazis. The Battle of Britain was one of the most critical battles in World War II. It directly led to the Blitz, one of the most iconic moments of the war. However, this battle was not only an attempt to break the British spirit. Hitler intended to conquer Britain much as he had just conquered France, and many historians believe a German victory would have altered the entire course of modern history. The Royal Air Force, with their spirit and determination, kept the Germans back, sealing September 15, 1940, as a momentous day in history. It's time to reflect on the Battle of Britain and see its history, timeline, and strategy. Looking back, we can appreciate how British determination held back the tide of oppression and tyranny. Although Hitler did not know it, he began losing World War II on September 15, 1940, at the Battle of Britain. What was the strategy behind the Battle of Britain? After World War I, air warfare became increasingly important for the world powers. War strategists created designs and tactics for how air warfare would be best utilized, creating heavy bomber fleets. German commander Walter Wever even developed a foundational method for bombings that continues to influence military engagements today. Wever stated bombing should be strategic, focusing on land, sea, and air bases, preventing troop movements into areas or during battles, and destroying military factories producing aircraft and other weapons. Although Wever was one of the first to write down this strategy, the Allied powers followed it more closely than the Germans did during World War II. The Germans were more inclined to use their new bomber fleet to terrorize their enemies into submission, destroying cities regardless of civilian life. They first tested their strategy in Poland in September 1939. They easily beat the Poles, razing towns and cities while fighting off unskilled Polish soldiers flying outdated aircraft. Their victory was so easy, the Germans became confident. While confidence is not unhealthy, the German leaders believed their fleet was strong enough to take on anyone because they had defeated the Polish. In actuality, the German aircraft were not adequate for the war. They were vulnerable to attacks and relatively slow. The German strategy for the Battle of Britain was similar to their plans against previous countries. Although Hitler claimed he did not want to fight Britain, its involvement in the Battle of France forced his hand. He felt he could not allow people who stood against him to remain. One of the problems with invading England was the English Channel. Hitler had to take over the Royal Navy before launching a successful attack, and the British Navy was more robust than the German Navy. He could only take Britain if he controlled the airspace over the English Channel, so the German strategy quickly circled around destroying the Royal Air Force. The Luftwaffe had more planes than Britain, but the Germans miscalculated how many planes Britain had, as well as their fighting spirit to save their homeland. The Luftwaffe preferred to approach with the sun behind them, giving an advantage as they attacked the Royal Air Force. However, the British quickly learned to be wary and to attack the Germans by surprise. If the element of surprise was unsuccessful on either side, the pilots would launch into a dogfight, which placed the Germans at a disadvantage because they needed to keep a closer eye on their fuel. Even though the Germans launched their attacks from countries like France and Belgium, they were still farther from a safe landing place than the British, so they could only stay in the fight for a short time. Of course, the British had some strategies of their own. They encountered the German Luftwaffe during the Battle of France, and the Royal Air Force quickly learned their pilots were also inexperienced, using air tactics from World War I, which proved outdated and unable to compete with the German pilots. The Royal Air Force didn't want to give up and quickly adapted as the Battle of Britain drew near. They decentralized aircraft production, creating parts in small factories before sending them to a finishing location. This strategy allowed the British to increase the number of planes during the Battle of Britain. Thankfully, the British had 900 fighter planes to start the battle, double what the Germans thought they had. The British also relied upon their early warning systems, some of which included people staring at the sky with binoculars. However, the most famous British early warning system was their radar. Today, some people believe radar was a closely kept secret, but most people already knew about it. The Germans even had their own radar, which was inferior to British radar. The German radar was inaccurate and short-range. British radar was more powerful, and the British could repair their radar towers more quickly than the Germans anticipated. What is the Battle of Britain's timeline? The battle started on July 10th, but the Germans began attacking Britain in June to test their defenses and predict strategies. They focused their June attacks on the English Channel, striking ships in the Royal Navy as they transported goods around the British Isles. Although the Royal Navy never entirely abandoned the English Channel, they did slow shipping as the battle intensified. The Luftwaffe learned several important lessons during these early attacks. For example, the Germans learned their dive bomber planes, named the Ju-87 Stuka and only a year old, were already obsolete. The Stukas had successfully taken Poland, but the Germans failed to innovate, leaving them vulnerable to British counterattacks. However, the Germans did not interpret the June attacks correctly. They were confident in their abilities, but by misinterpreting key events during June, they set themselves up for failure during the Battle of Britain. Luckily, the Royal Air Force also learned important lessons. They were vastly outnumbered but couldn't allow the Luftwaffe to attack without any resistance. The British learned how to divide their troops, sending enough planes to push back the Germans while conserving their strength. The Royal Air Force also realized they could not afford to lose as many planes or pilots as the Luftwaffe. They solved this by being aggressive and becoming better airmen than the Germans. As June continued, the Germans pushed into Britain, transitioning from reconnaissance to night raids and bombings. June 18th was the first time 100 German bombers flew over Britain. This shocked the people, but they soon realized seeing only 100 bombers was a light raid. July 1st was the first daytime raid, appearing over Yorkshire and Scotland. The bombings throughout June killed and wounded British civilians. Sadly, it was only the beginning of what the people would have to deal with. The battle officially began on July 10, 1940, with the most significant German air raid at that point. They had been attempting to lure the Royal Air Force into battle for several days, and their formation of 27 bombers, escorted by 48 other planes to attack a British convoy in the British Channel, finally sparked a fight. This first exchange began a pattern quickly becoming a staple for the Battle of Britain. The Royal Air Force sent out 30 planes against the Germans' 75, but they aggressively made up for their lower numbers, taking out a more significant number of German planes than the British lost. These frequent dogfights across the Channel gave the Royal Air Force pilots invaluable experience, allowing them to rewrite manuals and improve weaponry. The British also handled the dogfights by increasing plane production. The Germans did not, so in July, the British produced almost 500 planes more than the Germans. The British were also dedicated to repairing damages, even allowing civilian workers to make repairs while pilots waited. In contrast, the Luftwaffe's damaged aircraft tended to land in Britain or the Channel, making them unsalvageable. The Germans were dealing with high equipment losses and struggling with pilot exhaustion. The pilots on both sides suffered from fatigue, but the British pilots were allowed rest days whenever possible. The German pilots were not, which eventually increased pilot errors and turned the battle in favor of the British. Although the fights continued throughout the Battle of Britain, the next central point on the timeline is August 13th, known as Eagle Day. Thankfully, the British had advanced warning through radar and intercepted radio messages. This attack would be the biggest yet. The day before, the Germans focused on knocking out as many British radar stations as possible. They sent over 200 fighters across Britain, targeting key stations like Dover, and the sheer number of simultaneous attacks briefly threw off the British defense system. The Germans were elated, believing they had caused more damage than they had. Most attacks destroyed buildings, but did not disrupt the radar towers, which were the most crucial part of the radar system. Only one station received enough damage to be out of service on August 13th. All others were working again within 6 hours of the attack. The Germans overestimated their success, which eventually cost them the battle. August 13, 1940 began with miscommunication. The weather was too bad to fly, but not all units received the order to wait. 2 groups of bombers took off without fighter protection, and the Royal Air Force quickly stopped them. The rest of the planned attack began that afternoon, assaulting British airfields in an attempt to break the Royal Air Force. The attacks continued on August 15th. The Luftwaffe launched every plane they still had, accounting to over 1,800 sorties. They wanted to force all British fighter planes into the air and stretch the British defense too thin. However, the German forces had terrible intelligence. They believed the British only had 300 fighter planes, less than half of what they sent out that day. The Luftwaffe also did not know Britain's primary strategy, including only sending enough planes to deter the Germans, meaning that not all British craft would be in the sky simultaneously. The Luftwaffe started the morning by attacking England's southeast coast and northern area. The attack in North England went badly for the Germans, leaving them with heavy losses. The Germans attacked again that afternoon, hitting the Thames River, south-central England, and the Royal Navy base at Portland. The near-constant, massive attacks kept everyone busy and inflicted damage across Britain. But within a week of starting Eagle Day, the Germans had lost 10% of their fleet. It became increasingly clear that there were a growing number of British planes, and the shrinking number of German aircraft comprised several obsolete styles, limiting both range and when they could fly with limited detection. The Germans changed plans, pulling the obsolete planes and focusing on night bombings. They attacked airfields and populated cities, although they now avoided radar stations because those were too costly to destroy. The first bombing of London took place on August 24th by accident. The bombers had missed their target and decided to drop the bombs anyway. It gave the Royal Air Force the extra boost they needed as Britain called for revenge. The British flew to Berlin and proceeded to bomb it in retaliation, eventually sending Adolf Hitler into such a rage that he ordered the Luftwaffe to only focus on British cities, such as London. This finally gave the Royal Air Force needed focus and gave the Air Force bases time to recover from the raids. By September 15th, the British were ready again. September 15th is celebrated today as Battle of Britain Day. It began with the Luftwaffe launching another massive attack on London. About 1,000 Luftwaffe planes met 630 British planes, leaving no reserves on the ground. The fight was costly for all involved, but it was the day the Royal Air Force finally broke the Luftwaffe. The Germans would continue to launch night raids, but never controlled English skies. The British rose up under such adversity, uniting against the Nazis and permanently stamping the Battle of Britain into history. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Battle of Britain, check out our book, The Battle of Britain, a captivating guide to one of the most critical battles of World War II. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.